Hey everyone, this is Kevin from thechesswebsite.com, and today we're going to be going over how to attack the Nakhmanson Gambit if your opponent decides to decline the line and not partake in all the fun that is the accepted line. So the Nakhmanson Gambit, if you are not familiar, a lot of ways that you can get to it, but many times it's going to be from the Italian game, e4, e5, knight f3, knight c6, bishop to c4. They respond with knight to f6. White's just looking to develop material here. D4, after they take, White's not done giving up material. Castle on the king side, giving up the other central pawn. Not generally something you want to do unless you have a very good reason for it. But White's not done, and that is knight to c3. This is the Nakhmanson Gambit. I've done two other videos on the Nakhmanson Gambit. One is if Black takes with the pawn here. The other one is if the knight takes here on c3. But in today's video, we're going to be going over what happens if Black declines this gambit here on c3. I am trying something new in this video. In the description below, I will have links to each of the variations of how Black can defend. I know a lot of you come back to these videos and you may just want to see, hey, I'm seeing my opponent play this one variation, and instead of just fast forwarding through the video, I'm going to have links below so you can go to those individual lines. The particular lines we are going to be going over in this video, the first one is knight to d6. Makes a lot of sense. This does protect the knight, also defends the square here on f7, and attacks this bishop here on c4. The next one is knight to f6. Then we're going to be looking at bishop to e7, as well as pawn to d5. So again, links below if you want to fast forward at any point to any of those moves. If you would also please like this video. If you haven't already, please subscribe. Definitely helps out the channel, putting in a lot of work into these videos. I've had a lot of requests to go deeper into the openings, not just do a high level. So trying that out with the Nakhmanson Gambit. This is the third in-depth video for the Nakhmanson Gambit. So if you wouldn't mind, please liking the video. That definitely helps a lot. So let's go ahead and get into it. And the first variation that we're going to be looking at is if Black declines by playing knight to d6. Now, a common theme that we're going to have throughout this video is you always need to be attacking in the Nakhmanson Gambit. It's not good enough to find moves where you allow your opponent to exchange material, you trade off your queen, all of a sudden you're down material, you're in the middle approaching the endgame, and there's just no way for you to win. So you always want to be attacking your opponent. The best way to continue the attack here is bishop to g5. Now, there's a couple ways they could defend this. Bishop to e7 makes a lot of sense. They could also play knight d7, but bishop d7 seems pretty straightforward from Black. This is being protected by the queen and the knight. Also, it prepares to castle on the king side. White's going to continue to take this material here on e7. Now, more than likely, they're going to go ahead and take with their knight. They could take with their queen, but it gets kind of awkward once you play rook here to e1 at some point. So knight to e7, and then queen to d4. Want to be extremely aggressive in this game, and this is the best way to do that, attacking right here on g7. Now, they have a couple options of how they can continue. They can castle on the king side, or they could play knight takes here on c4. First, let's go ahead and take a look at if they castle on the king side. We want to keep our bishop very involved into the game. And once you castle on the king side, your king's pretty safe, and this f7 square is pretty safe as well. Before you castle, this is a vulnerability because usually the king is the only piece that's protecting it. In this case, the knight here on d6 is protecting it as well. Another reason that this bishop on this long light square diagonal isn't doing as much. So castle on the king side, best move for White to continue is bishop to d3. And this is attacking a very vulnerable square here on h7. So if Black's not paying attention, an extreme example would be a6 here. They're probably not going to, but to give you an example of how this would look, bishop to h7, and Black's going to have a difficult time. If they take here, it's actually going to be a loss. There's no way to stop the threat, although it does take a while from here because knight to g5, this is threatening queen up here to h7, and then Black's just going to lose so much material here. There's no way to stop it. Now, it could take a while depending on if your opponent plays correctly, but there is no way to stop the threat at some point. Now, if we come back, if they don't take, that bishop there on h7. That's going to be completely fine. Still going to be a very, very good game for white, but they could say king to h8. Okay, well now still queen to h4. This is threatening a discovered attack once the bishop moves here. They could decide to play knight to f5. This is attacking the queen. It is defended by the knight right here. But again, remember that discovered attack here. You can't just take this bishop back with the knight here. This is check. Really need to take with the queen here. After the queen takes, then the bishop's or you have the knight taking here on h4. This is protecting this bishop. White is up a material here with a very, very strong attack going on. The king's no longer as safe, and it's in the corner, which, as we get into the middle game, you want to get your king involved into the action. It's not right now. So white's going to have a very, very good game in this position. Now let's come back. You're probably not going to see a6, but some of the other options, bishop to d3 and then g6. Okay, well, this stops the immediate threat of the bishop coming here to h7. From here, white's going to get more material involved into the game. Rook here to e1. This is more threats that you're putting on your opponent because it may look like this knight here on e7 is safe. The queen is protecting it. So right now, may want to try to get the light square bishop involved into the game. Can't because of this pawn here on the d file. It's not going anywhere. So could decide to play b6, preparing for bishop here to b7. But white can actually just take this material here on e7 because after the queen takes, then knight to d5, attacking the queen. There's no real good square for the knight to go, or the queen to go to here. But maybe queen comes back here to d8, and then knight to f6 check. King to h8, and then knight to g5. There's always going to be a discovered attack with this knight if it moves, and it's protected, so the queen can't just take it here. It's protected by the queen. So a lot of attacking lines that white has in this position. Should end up with a very, very easy game. You can also just take here at h7. Is protected by the knight here as well. So let's come back. Maybe they don't play g6. Maybe another option would be, okay, let's bring our knight here to f5. This opens up the door for the pawn to come at some point. This is also attacking the queen right here. White can just swing over to g4. Being extremely aggressive here, does not want to just retreat the queen. So maybe d5 at this point, and then rook over here to e1. You still want to continue all of your attacking lines in this position. So if we come back to this position right here, we just looked at what if black castle's on the king side, but they could also take with their knight here on c4. Now what you shouldn't do is just take with your queen right here on c4. Because then they're going to castle on the king side, and you don't have any more threats. Black is up upon a material, pretty safe spot right here. At the end of the day, it's going to be difficult to get that material back, and you've lost all your attacking pieces. Better would be to just go ahead and start gobbling up material here. Queen, or after they play knight takes here on c4, queen to g7, and this puts more pressure on your opponent because they may not understand this position all too well, and they may not recognize that f8 is actually a huge mistake. g8, they may look at that and say, yeah, you're just going to gobble up my material here on h7, so there's no difference in g8 or f8, and so they may think that f8 is actually a safer move, but it's not, because after f8, well, this is going to lose to knight to g5, putting a lot of pressure on the opponents right here. And then how do they really respond in this position? Maybe opening up for their king to move, maybe d5 here, but then knight to h7. This is threatening the queen coming here to f8. Maybe knight to f6 or f5, because this is also threatening the knight coming here to f6. So that's going to be mate by itself. So maybe then we have knight to f5. Queen takes here on f8, and you can just see material starts to gobble up. There's just no good way for black to continue in this spot. Now, if we come back and say, yeah, that's what happens if the rook comes to f8. What if it does come to g8? Okay, understand. Just go ahead and gobble up material here. This king is not going to be safe the rest of the game, and so while they are up material here, it is definitely going to be difficult for them to win this game. White's just going to be attacking the rest of the way, and it also allows for other areas for them to make mistakes because this rook is being protected, but what if they think they're safe right now and they play knight takes on b2? They want to gobble up material right here. Well, this is going to lose to knight to e5. This is threatening queen coming here to f7. So how do they really stop that? Maybe at this point, rook to f8, but then knight to g4, and this is, again, going to lose because it's threatening this knight to f6. Same as we saw before, maybe knight to g6 trying to stop that, but then a rook over here to e1, queen to e7, knight to d5. You can see things are getting worse and worse for black. Now let's come back in this position. Maybe they don't take that material there on b2. Maybe they play d5. This is protecting this knight here on c4. This is opening up for the light square bishop to get involved into the game. Okay, we're going to bring our rook over here to e1, continue to attack. Maybe they play bishop to c6, and then rook to d1, continuously giving them opportunities to make a mistake. Now, the best move for black in this position is actually king to d7, but this is an incredibly difficult move to find for black. How many people, once the rook comes over to the d file, are going to say, yeah, I'll go ahead and move my king voluntarily, and I'm going to go ahead and put it here on this d7 square? Many of them are not. It's a very, very difficult move to find. So let's say in this position they don't find that move and they played knight to b2. Looks like it's gobbling up material, also attacking this rook here on d1. This rook's not really going to take this material here on d5, but what white can do is actually take the material. And if the knight takes here, then the rook can swing up check, and after the pawn takes, then the queen takes here on a g8. And this is why the king coming here to d7 was such a good move, is you don't have to worry about this move right here of taking the rook and it being checked. But it's so difficult for black to understand that that's where they should go. From here, king moves to e7, queen to g7 check, and then you could see the knight coming up here to e4, putting a lot of pressure on the opponent. Maybe now queen to d7 attacking. But then you just take this material here on b2. Now, how do they really continue from here? Because it's difficult. White is threatening this material here on b7, but they can still make mistakes. Again, you're usually playing this in some sort of blitz or rapid game. If they look at this and say, I'll go ahead and protect that material, let's say b6 here, well, then queen to h8 check, and then they're going to drop even more material in the game. So as we come back here, that's why it's so important that you continue to attack your opponent. Once they take with their knight here on c4, you can't just take here on c4. You've lost all your attacking momentum. You got to continue attacking, and that means you're going to be playing queen to g7. Let's come back to this position right here. We just looked at the bishop comes to e7, but another option would be the knight coming here to e7. Now, this is starting to block off the material. It's very difficult for black to continue development in this spot. But in this case, I'm going to go ahead and play queen takes on d4. No need to exchange material right here. This knight, all it is being pinned down and blocking the development here. So in this spot, how does black really continue? Well, knight taking here on c4 makes a lot of sense, but then we're just going to play rook to e1 here. And this is where things, you just continue to attack. If they say, okay, I'm just going to bring my knight back here to d6, well, now white can take, and they can't take with their bishop. It is going to be checkmate. Queen takes here on g7. We can already see here that they can't play rook to g8. Well, that's going to be checkmate right away. And they also can't just bring their rook over here to f8. That's going to eventually lose with knight to d5. This is threatening the move knight to f6, checkmate. So let's say maybe they play knight to e4. This is stopping the move right away. So rook takes here on e4, pawn to f5, just trying to stop something. But now all of a sudden rook can come to e7, queen takes, and then this is going to be checkmate. So there's no way to stop that. Instead of taking with their bishop, though, you can see if they take with their queen, well, the rook can just take right here on e7, but white actually has an even better move, and that is the knight coming here to d5. Now, if they wanted to take with their queen, that's fine. This is going to be check, and after the king moves here to d8, then white can come over here to h4, continue the attack here. Pawn to f6, that's fine. We can just take with our knight right here. And they can't just freely take because this is going to be checkmate. They can just stop it here and we just recapture. So instead, maybe they play bishop here to e7. But we just take with our rook right here. Maybe knight to f5, attacking our rook, but that's fine. We could just play queen to g5. And the main theme here is they can't just freely take with their king because knight to d5, check. Maybe if they want to continue down this same path, check again. We are forking their rook right here. Material is going to fall here where they're going to lose their knight. They could lose, depending on where they end up going. Our queen can get very involved into the game. Queen here to d2, continue the checking. We're also threatening our queen up here to g7. So a lot of different threats that white has in this position. Now, if we come back here, we just looked at knight coming to d6. Let's say they tried to gobble up material. Again, that's not what the game's about. They need to be focusing on protecting. But same thing, bishop takes here on e7. They can't just take with their material and not end up losing here. Bishop takes on e7. We're going to have the queen coming up here. Rook to f8. Knight to d5. And this is going to end up in a checkmate. Now, in this position, they could say, well, let's play d6. This does delay the inevitable here, but queen takes on h8, maybe king to d6, queen to h7. You can see white's just gobbling up all the material here. c6, gobble up here on f7. That's not going to go well either. Now, if we come back, instead of the knight taking here on b2, maybe they play d6. But in this case, we're still pinning down their knight in two different ways, both with our rook and our bishop here. If they're not going to do anything with this queen or this knight here on c4, the queen can just freely take that knight here on c4. So that's not going to be good. So they could play d5. This does protect this knight here on c4, but that's fine. We are just going to play bishop takes. After the bishop takes, then the knight comes up here, captures material here, maybe bishop here to e6, and then the queen takes here on g7, rook to f8, and then knight to f4. You want to continue to attack material. You can get your other knight involved into the action if you want to, but now you have the knight and the rook here. You can also swing your rook over at some point. You can gobble on material here on h7, but you have a very, very strong attack. Other thing you could see, some people always like in the Nakhmanson Gambit to be playing something like c6. This is not going to help though. Bishop takes here. After the bishop takes, queen takes on g7. You're always going to be looking to attack this king side of the board here. Rook to f8 and then knight to e4, threatening a lot of the same threats that we had before. The next variation we are going to look at is if the knight comes back to f6. And in this spot, white's going to continue the attack with knight to g5. This knight can freely come here because it's not being attacked by the queen here. And this is the way to go instead of bringing your bishop here, because instead of bringing your bishop and pinning down this knight, this has two attackers on the square here on f7. Pretty common way for white to attack, especially early on. This f7 square only defended by the king. So in this spot, how does black continue? If they're not familiar with this, that they could say knight to e5. This is a safe square and it defends the square here on f7. They may not know of another option here, but that's going to lose with rook to e1. Now, how do they really stop this? If they now look at it and say d5, okay, well, then we can just gobble up this material here on e5. Definitely not going to be able to stop that. Now, if they come back and say, what if we just play d5 in this spot? Okay, well, knight's going to take here on d5. If they take, then queen to f3, and we continue the attack. A lot of attacking lines here. This is also queen and the bishop are both attacking this knight right here. Can swing your rook over here to e1. Pretty common setup that white has with the knight here on g5. The next variation we're going to look at is if the bishop comes to e7. Looks like it's blocking a lot of stuff off, getting ready to castle on the king side. As soon as you castle, you feel like you have safety, but we're not going to allow that to happen because we're going to go ahead and sacrifice material here. Hey, we were all ready to give up this knight here on c3. So what does it matter if we just give up a bishop here on f7? That's exactly what we're going to do. After the king takes right here, then the knight comes to e4. Don't even have to give up that material here on c3. And all of a sudden, the king is open, exposed in the game, can really start to attack our opponents now. How do they continue? More than likely, they should be playing d5. If they don't, it is going to be a mistake, and you can start to gobble up more material here. But d5, definitely the best way to continue. I recommend playing g5 at this spot. I've seen others that will play this g5, but I just feel like knight to g5 is the better option here. Allows you to play rook to e1 as your next move, because more than likely, they're going to be playing either bishop takes, or they're going to be bringing their king back, let's say, to e8. And then you're playing rook to e1, pinning down this material. If they do take, it's still fine. You're just going to recapture with your knight right here. It's being protected by your bishop. Then you're going to swing your rook over. You can start to gobble up material at some point, but definitely have a very, very good attacking line with their king completely exposed the rest of the game. The last variation we're going to look at is if they play d5. This puts a lot of pressure on the center and says, yeah, we're going to attack both your knight and your bishop, and we don't want you attacking our king side of the board. From here, I'm going to completely ignore that altogether. Yes, you can start to gobble up this material. I just feel like playing rook to e1 gives my opponent more opportunities to make a mistake. So from here, they have a few options of how they could continue, because they could always make a mistake. They could look at this and say, the centers of the board's fine, so I'm going to play something like bishop to g4. I'm going to go ahead and pin down more material here, and it may look like this is the way to go, but it's actually not, because from here you could just play knight takes on d5, and this is threatening the rook now coming up here to e4. So from here, let's say they played knight to e7, then we just gobble up material right here. Maybe now they feel like they need to retreat, bishop to e6. You can just gobble up that material as well, because knight to f4 is completely deadly for white. Now, if we come back and say, what if they don't play knight e7? What if they just start to gobble up material right here? That's fine. You could just play queen takes here on f3, maybe bishop to e7, queen takes here on e4. White has just all the attacking lines right here. Now, if they look at this and say, okay, well, that's fine, I'm going to go ahead and hold on to material with f5, you can see that the king's safety is just falling by the wayside here, and then h3 is very difficult to deal with, because if the bishop takes, they may feel like they're exchanging material because they may assume we're going to recapture with our queen, but we're not. We're going to recapture with our pawn here, and this knight can't move. It's pinned down by the rook here on e1, so this knight is going to fall. Now, if the bishop comes back, maybe bishop to h5, then knight to f4, this opens up for the bishop to come to attack here on f7, but also attacking the bishop. How does the bishop really respond here? Maybe bishop to g6, but then knight to e6 is so difficult to deal with here. It's attacking the queen, attacking so many critical squares. Just no good place for black to really respond here. Can get his under knight involved into the game, bishop involved into the game. Still can't move the knight because it's being pinned down. If he ever does move it, there's some really bad places that they can go to. So this is how you respond if they make a mistake, playing bishop to g4 early on. Now, they may not make a mistake. So if they take one of your pieces early on, so they have the option of taking with the pawn here on c3, they could also take the bishop here. If they take with their pawn right here, I'm going to go ahead and recommend and take with your bishop right here, because you're setting up for the rook to take here on e4. Now, if they try to hold on to this material, bishop to f5 makes a lot of sense. I'm still going to take material. Bishop takes, and then the bishop's going to capture right here. And the main reason for this is they may feel like that they can just go ahead and take with their queen here on d1, but that's actually going to be a mistake, because we can now play bishop to c6 check, and they're going to have to respond to that. So king to d8, but now we can just come over here, take material, Rook takes on d1, check. They now have to move, and now we can bring our bishop here to a4, and now we are up material. So they have to be careful. They really need to take with their bishop, and after they take with their bishop, now we can capture with our rook. We do have check, bishop to e7, and then queen to e2, continue our attack. We don't want to trade off queens in this position. So if we come back, maybe they don't come down with their bishop to f5. Maybe they play pawn down to f5. In this spot, same thing as we've seen before, and that is knight up here to g5. This is not only putting two attackers on this f7 square, it's also putting another attacker on this e4 square, and this knight cannot move. It's still being pinned down by this rook here on e1. Now, lastly, you could see after this move, you could see bishop here to e7. In this case, we're just going to take that material right here. If they're not going to protect it, we're definitely going to take it because it's still going to put more pressure on our opponent. If they want to castle on the king side, that's fine. We can still continue our attack. The last variation we're going to look at is in this position if they decide to take with their pawn here on c4. And you can already tell our move. It's pretty obvious, and that's just taking with our rook here on e4. Check. Usually you're going to see bishop here to e7 makes a lot of logical sense for the reasons we've talked about before, preparing to castle on the king side. In this spot, you're going to be playing knight takes here on d4. Now, what's really good is this may feel like they can just castle on the king side. No problem at all, but this is actually going to be very, very good for white. That's why I like putting my opponent in positions where they can make a mistake, because this feels pretty normal, but now I can just take with my knight here on c6. Now, they could feel like, yeah, I'll just go ahead and take with my queen down here, but I can respond, take with my knight here on d1, and their bishop is being attacked right here. So if they move their queen or their bishop, that's fine. If they take with their pawn, well, then I could just take their bishop. They're up a pawn in material here, but then you can look at that. We have two minor pieces to their one. We're just going to gobble up all these pawns right here. They have no good way to continue. So in this spot, maybe they play bishop to f6, but then we play knight to e7 check. Then we gobble up material here. We have two minor pieces to their one. We're going to start gobbling up material. This is not going to go well for them. So if we come back here, maybe in earlier spots, maybe they don't play bishop to e7. Maybe they play bishop to e6. Well, from here, we're just going to continue with knight taking here on d4, attacking this bishop. We have so many attacking lines. We can get our dark square bishop involved into the game. So these are the ways that I would attack my opponent if they decline the Nakhmanson Gambit. Hopefully you guys enjoyed this video. It's a three-parter for the Nakhmanson Gambit. If you do like this series of going more in depth, I know this video is a little bit longer, but if you have made it the entire time, thank you guys so much for watching. If there's other openings that you would like me to cover this in depth, please let me know in the comments below. You can also reach out to me on the website. I have a chat functionality. You can always email me at the chess website at gmail.com. But thank you guys so much for watching, and I'll see you guys in the next video.